Strekks here. Dark Souls 2.
So with the release of Dark Souls 2, it has naturally received a lot of critical acclaim from major publications. Some say it's the best game yet, and it was hard to avoid the buzz. I was planning on the PC release, and I've still got it ordered, but decided to bite the bullet and get it on the consoles.
I've been planning on a video for a while now, but I do want to focus on something in particular while I work on other videos. Don't worry, a full retrospective is in the works, but I do believe I need to focus on this now rather than later. For anyone in general, I'll say this. I like this game. It gives me a lot of the core Souls experience, which is really enjoyable, and it's hard for me to dislike any new iteration into the series, and I'm sure I'm gonna enjoy it for the hours to come.
As an avid fan of the series, I think it's good to discuss certain features and decisions From Software have made, however negative they may be.
It comes from a place that loves this franchise, and regardless of what I say, I do believe From Software are a talented set of individuals.
But the primary problem comes down to focus. Hidetaka Miyazaki was the director of the first two games, and him stepping back I feel has a lot to do with how Dark Souls 2 was approached. He was very clear on what he wanted, always pushing for keeping things unified, serving the core ideas. A great example of this is the interview within the Designworks art book. An extract of this interview reads, "You may not believe me, but I always try to maintain a certain level of refinement and elegance in all the designs. I often told the artists muddy or messy is definitely not good. I think this carries through the entire game. Of course, if you ask me to describe what this elegance is, well, I think you just have to look at the designs and judge for yourself. But it really is one of the most important factors in everything I oversee."
With him taking a backseat role, I feel like elements in this game don't have as much polish as they could have. And although they go with some logical ideas, they aren't as focused or as poignant as they could be.
For the service of comparison, let's take it one at a time.
You can say this is a relatively personal matter, but I do believe that the sequel has set itself up for a hard task due to how it opens.
The cinematic focuses on you. You are the center of the story. It's a very different tone from the previous game due to this. There's almost hope, despite the rather dire situation the player is in. Change is always good, and I cannot take it away from the game. However, I don't think we ever get a taste of this until much, much later in the game, despite crucial NPCs seeming to believe otherwise.
It's this disconnect from emphasizing my importance in the world, then quickly hiding it away. It leaves a bad taste in my mouth. With Dark Souls 1, it almost mocks this idea. The opening cinematic gives you nothing.
It sets up the world and its most powerful figures, giving the player a sense of place, as it coldly opens to you locked away. You are nothing. Hope is merely a shining object dropped from above. Dropped by a knight we find dying a little later.
There was an old saying in my family, "Thou who art undead art chosen."
These words, uttered by another missionary, passing the torch to you.
It's grim and lonely, highlighting that you are a walker of circumstance, rather than fate. And this is later reaffirmed as a common occurrence.
The game's tone and focus builds naturally off this, bringing into focus your importance through deeds. It feeds you glory through success rather than expectation. It's consistent, organic, and wonderful in its execution, and most certainly allows the player to approach the story in any way they wish, to delve deeper, or to ignore completely.
This doesn't so much push the narrative and the world aside, rather it builds upon it.
It rotates, irrespective of your actions. It's always within your vision, still creating an atmosphere and pace. To me, it's odd that Dark Souls 2's more direct approach felt far more hollow. It seemed to be mechanical, speaking the words without understanding the language. NPC interaction is forced upon you in certain sections to advance, and the game really tries to draw attention to how you will die over and over in the earlier sections. This felt ham-fisted, unnecessary, and really took me out of the experience. It felt like something lifted from a trailer to a much less stellar title, trying to convince me with words rather than finesse.
All of this collated into me being turned away from the story, becoming much more bitter compared to its more open counterpart. This is the crux of what left me puzzled, so let's follow in some sort of order. How is it for beginners? It's methodical.
It offers basics in a very contrived fashion, setting up enemies in plain sight, backs turned, and waiting for trouble. They throw a few curveballs later on, but the locale doesn't feel like something real, something believable. It feels like a tutorial, no more, no less. It almost doesn't seem to feed into the rest of the game. The large amount of bosses should tell you a boss is necessary. Nothing is here though. I'm sure players will die in a few sections, but overall it's very cobbled together.
Very methodical.
The only time it offers a slither of intrigue and excitement is with the ogres that are within the area. They are highly durable and hit hard, and any new players will be easily crushed. The issue once more is, the player has the option to engage. You see them far off into the distance, which is a sound mechanic in itself, but once more, the player may not even see this if they avoid the tutorial, or they won't even try their chances until much later.
No matter what, they are never forced to employ their skills against a strong adversary, which really goes against the rest of the game's progression. To its predecessor, it teaches far more of what to expect without feeling as contrived.
Everything is set up to get the player interacting with the mechanics, rather than simply laying out a road and a checklist. To open the cell, you need to learn how to interact with items, very clearly showing us what the glowing matter is. An item. Traps? Throw a trap at them, opening an area to gain the healing items from a lost knight. Drop the boss straight onto the player to highlight misdirection, and how anything can happen from room to room. Have shortcuts looping back to other areas. This is all set within the means of a world. As a prisoner, you start ill-equipped for what is to come. You gain your equipment as you progress, giving this far more believable dynamic between the player and the world. Jumping onto the boss? An advantage that can be taken away from you. A huge boulder trap, causing damage to a nearby wall.
By making it seem far less contrived, you're allowing the player to get engrossed within the game, regardless of their experience.
It still maintains the player controlling their pace and whether to read the messages, without sacrificing the introduction for the sake of learning. It works in tandem.
A common plus for Dark Souls 2 is that they compensate for veteran players. This seems sort of logical, but there's something very odd about that idea. Dark Souls and compensating?
This series thrives on challenge, on forcing the player to adapt to new situations. Compensation undermines that idea.
Honestly, this is a strictly personal gripe, as many a time it's welcomed. However, here, I believe it drops the ball.
Firstly, in allowing people to skip this tutorial, the player can get straight to the second bonfire with absolutely no danger in between them, and can slowly explore and prod this very vast expanse at their own pace. In the opening cinematic, the game has constantly reiterated the dire situation the player is in, and how they will die, time and again. Yet by opening up the player's options, it undermines this idea completely. With no thematic setup from a gameplay perspective, I found myself slightly lost, not really knowing how the game wanted me to feel.
From such a build-up prior to this section, the bland payoff feels underwhelming. With Dark Souls 1, it's a very different idea. Ignore all the messages and it simply becomes the opening. It's as simple as that.
You could say going through this section time and again may grow tiresome, but it is relatively easy for the players who know what they're doing. It's a mark of how far they've come as they breeze through the prison. There's history in their steps, and arrogance in their stride, even if the world they inhabit stands against them.
Which is precisely what makes the sequel's introduction, in comparison, a lesser experience for me. Choice.
With Dark Souls 1, no matter what experience you may have, you must defeat the Asylum Demon and gain freedom. It is not an optional boss, and drops a cherry onto the proverbial prologue pie. Narratively, you're asking them to take their own fate by the reins. If the player isn't up to the task, they stay in the dungeon. It brings the world, the themes, and the mechanics all into a single moment, asking the player to prove themselves. Some would call me pretentious to call that art. This lack of choice has turned many away, and a question that leaves many puzzled is whether that's a failure of game design.
Honestly, I'd argue against that thought.
It serves to ensure that the player knows what they're in for, and if they are ready. It's this odd meta-narrative that hangs on the player's willpower. It's central to the whole franchise's appeal, something I feel was lost in its successor. With any player able to run freely and not even meet a boss until they've tackled the first area, there's far less grace and even interest in the beginning hours. It was not like Dark Souls 2 changed focus though, but I truly believe its introduction is the mark of an easier answer.
It's more accessible, it's safer, it's functional. But for me, that's certainly not enough.
Because as Dark Souls 2 goes on, it becomes a good game.
Is it worthy of the praise above its predecessors? Maybe not.
But I personally believe Dark Souls 2 deserves to demand attention for its opening act. It deserves to say no to the impatient. It deserves to welcome the strong with the sting of metal and the pounding of the monstrous. It deserves to isolate and scare you.
It deserves to say, prepare to die. Thanks for watching, guys. This is actually the anniversary of when I started. Anniversary? It's actually been 1 year since I released my first video, which was on Dark Souls 1. So I thought I'd wait and release this instead of rushing it and pissing everyone off. I've also reached 500 subscribers, though it's shaking up and down, so just take my word for it, I guess. When I last checked, I was. But I'm humbled that people are still watching me, and it's grown to such a substantial level. And I can't believe I'm still doing this, and I'm grateful for people watching what I do. In any case, in terms of videos, I'm working on a lot of big things, and I'm trying to keep my channel going, but it's kind of just shaky every now and then, just getting new ideas and getting back on track. I can't promise anything. I make it if I want to. But for the channel, I'm still gonna keep doing stuff, and I hope that we keep going together. I hope you keep watching me, and I hope you enjoy what I do. In terms of Dark Souls, there's a 3-part series later in the works. So, I hope you enjoy, guys, and again, I'm grateful. Thanks for all your help and keeping me going. I've been Strekks. Catch ya. Yeah.